They thought Chen was just another timid music nerd who wouldn't fight back when they shattered her grandmother's violin into pieces. What they didn't know was that those same delicate fingers that created beautiful melodies had also been trained to deliver devastating strikes that could drop a grown man in seconds. By the time the final note played that night, those bullies would discover that sometimes the quietest people carry the most dangerous secrets, and mercy is a choice, not a weakness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Chen had been invisible at Westfield High for exactly 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. Not by choice, but by necessity. When her father's promotion forced their family to relocate from Phoenix to the suburbs of Denver, she'd made a conscious decision to keep her head down and blend into the background. It was easier that way. No questions about her past, no expectations to live up to, and most importantly, no one would discover the part of herself she'd been trying to leave behind. She found her sanctuary in the music room during lunch periods, where the familiar weight of her violin case provided the only comfort in an otherwise alien environment. The instrument itself was more than just wood and strings. It was her grandmother's legacy, a 1940s German violin that had survived wars, immigrations, and decades of loving hands. When drew the bow across its strings, she could almost hear her grandmother's voice guiding her through the melodies. They'd practiced together in the small Phoenix apartment, where she'd first learned that music could heal wounds that words couldn't touch. Mr. Davidson, the music teacher, had noticed her talent immediately. During her first week at Westfield, he'd heard her practicing a complicated batch piece through the closed door of his office and had quietly slipped inside to listen. Had frozen mid-note when she'd spotted him, her face flushing with embarrassment at being caught. But instead of asking her to leave, Mr. Davidson had simply smiled and said she was welcome to use the room whenever she needed it. He'd seen something in her playing that went beyond technical skill, something raw and emotional that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with music in the first place. Maya's daily routine was predictable and safe. She arrived at school just as the first bell rang, navigating the crowded hallways with her eyes fixed on the floor, violin case clutched protectively against her chest. She ate lunch alone in the music room, practiced her pieces, and left immediately after her last class. She spoke only when spoken to, completed her assignments with quiet efficiency, and avoided eye contact with anyone who might mistake her presence for an invitation to interact. The other students barely registered her existence, which was exactly how she preferred it. She was the girl who sat in the back corner, who never raised her hand even when she knew the answer, who seemed to shrink into herself whenever attention turned her way. Her teachers saw her as a diligent but unremarkable student. Her classmates saw her as weird, if they saw her at all. None of them bothered to wonder what had shaped this shy, careful girl, or what secrets might be hidden beneath her deliberately unremarkable exterior. Maya's mother worried about her daughter's isolation, encouraging her to join clubs or make friends. But Maya always deflected these conversations with vague promises to be more social when she felt ready. The truth was more complicated than her mother understood. In Phoenix, Maya had been different, confident, outgoing, with a tight circle of friends who shared her passions. But Phoenix Maya had also been someone else entirely, someone who spent her afternoons not just practicing violin, but training in a converted warehouse gym where the sound of striking pads mixed with grunts of exertion and the sharp commands of her coach. Maya had discovered mixed martial arts by accident when she was 14. A friend's older brother had been training at a local MMA gym, and Maya had tagged along one day out of curiosity. She'd expected to feel out of place among the mostly male fighters, but something about the discipline and precision of the sport had called to her. The same focus that allowed her to master complex musical pieces translated perfectly to learning combinations, grappling techniques, and the mental chess game of combat sports. Her parents had been skeptical at first, worried about their quiet, artistic daughter getting hurt, but Maya's coach, a former professional fighter named Elena Vasquez, had assured them that MMA training would build Maya's confidence and teach her valuable self-defense skills. What Elena hadn't mentioned, because she hadn't expected it, was that Maya would prove to be a natural prodigy with an almost supernatural ability to read opponents and adapt her strategy mid-fight. Within 2 years, Maya had earned her blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, developed lightning-fast striking combinations, and competed in several junior tournaments, where she dominated opponents with a fighting style that was both technical and unexpectedly aggressive. Her last fight in Phoenix had been against a girl 2 weight classes above her, a regional champion who'd expected an easy victory. Maya had ended the fight in the first round with a combination so swift and precise that the crowd had fallen silent before erupting in stunned applause. But that version of Maya felt like a different person now, someone from a past life that she'd carefully buried beneath layers of deliberate invisibility. The move to Colorado had given her the opportunity to reinvent herself as just Maya, the quiet music student, rather than Maya Chen, the fighter who'd earned the nickname Silent Storm for her ability to end fights with devastating efficiency, while maintaining an almost serene composure. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd traded one kind of performance for another. In Phoenix, she'd performed confidence and aggression in the ring. In Denver, she performed meekness and vulnerability in the hallways. Both were strategic choices, ways of controlling how the world perceived her and interacted with her. The difference was that fighting had made her feel powerful, while hiding made her feel safe. Jessica Winters first noticed Maya on a Tuesday in late February when she was holding court at her usual cafeteria table, surrounded by her carefully curated group of followers. Jessica ruled Westfield High's social hierarchy with the kind of calculated cruelty that masked itself as confidence. And she had an almost supernatural ability to identify students who didn't fit her narrow definition of acceptable. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maya had made the mistake of sitting too close to Jessica's table that day, close enough for Jessica to overhear her quietly declining an invitation to join the school's string quartet. "Did you hear that?" Jessica had said, just loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "Little violin girl thinks she's too good for the orchestra nerds." Her voice carried that particular tone of false confusion that Bullies perfected, the one that made cruelty sound like innocent observation. Maya had felt her face burn with embarrassment as conversation stopped and heads turned in her direction. She'd wanted to explain that she'd declined because she was too shy to perform with others, not because she thought she was better than them, but the words had stuck in her throat. Instead, she'd gathered her things and fled to the music room, Jessica's laughter echoing behind her. That incident had been Jessica's first taste of the power she could wield over Maya, and like any predator, she'd quickly become addicted to the feeling. Over the following weeks, Jessica's attention had escalated from occasional comments to daily harassment. She'd accidentally bump into Maya in the hallways, sending her books scattered across the floor. She'd make loud observations about Maya's clothes, her hair, her habit of eating lunch alone. She'd recruited her friends Chloe Martinez and Ryan Parker to join in the fun, creating a small but persistent campaign of psychological warfare designed to make Maya's school days as miserable as possible. Maya had endured it all with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything else, never responding to the taunts, never giving Jessica the dramatic reaction she was clearly hoping for. This restraint had only made Jessica more determined to find Maya's breaking point. She'd started following Maya to the music room, listening outside the door during practice sessions, making comments about the weird noises coming from inside. Mr. Davidson had noticed the change in Maya's demeanor, the way she'd started looking over her shoulder when she played, how she'd begun packing up quickly whenever footsteps approached in the hallway. He'd gently asked if everything was all right, if there was anything he could do to help, but Maya had just shaken her head and assured him that she was fine. She'd dealt with bullies before, she'd told herself. She just needed to outlast them, to bore them into finding a new target. What Maya hadn't anticipated was how personal Jessica would make it, or how far she'd be willing to go to get a reaction. The harassment had reached a crescendo in early March when Jessica had convinced several students to video Maya eating lunch. Alone, posting the footage on social media with captions about weird loner girl and future cat lady. The video had gone viral within the school, with dozens of students sharing it and adding their own cruel commentary. Maya had only learned about the video when a girl in her chemistry class had shown it to her friend, not realizing Maya was sitting close enough to see the screen. The humiliation had been overwhelming, seeing herself through their eyes, understanding that her carefully constructed invisibility had been stripped away and replaced with unwanted notoriety as the school's official outcast. That night, Maya had come home to find her mother waiting in the kitchen with her laptop open, the video paused on the screen. Mrs. Chen's eyes had been filled with tears and rage, and she'd immediately started talking about calling the school, speaking to the principal, making sure those kids faced consequences for their cruelty. But Maya had begged her not to intervene, convinced that adult involvement would only make things worse. Instead, Maya had made a decision that surprised even herself. She'd asked Mr. Davidson if she could perform a solo piece at the upcoming Spring Music Showcase, the school's biggest musical event of the year. It would be her first public performance. At Westfield, her first step out of the shadows she'd so carefully cultivated. Mr. Davidson had been thrilled, immediately offering to help her prepare and suggesting several pieces that would showcase her remarkable talent. Maya had chosen Paganini's Caprice No. 24, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the violin repertoire, a composition that required not just skill but genuine artistry to perform well. She'd been working on it privately for months, using it as a way to channel her frustration and loneliness into something beautiful. The piece was also deeply personal. It had been her grandmother's favorite, the last thing they'd played together before her grandmother's death 2 years earlier. For the next 6 weeks, Maya had thrown herself into preparation with an intensity that surprised everyone around her. She'd stayed after school every day, sometimes practicing until the custodial staff had to ask her to leave so they could lock up the building. Mr. Davidson had watched her transformation with amazement as she'd gradually become more confident, more animated, more like the passionate musician he'd suspected was hiding beneath her shy exterior. The other students had gradually become aware that Maya was preparing something special for the showcase. Word had spread through the school's musical community that the quiet girl from the back corner was going to perform one of the most challenging pieces in classical music. Some students had expressed genuine excitement and curiosity, but Jessica had seen Maya's upcoming performance as the perfect opportunity to deliver a devastating blow to her favorite target. 2 days before the Spring Music Showcase, Jessica had recruited Chloe and Ryan for what she'd describe as a harmless prank that would teach Violin Girl a lesson about trying to show off. The 3 of them had convinced a custodian that they needed to retrieve a project from the music room after hours, then had slipped inside when his attention was elsewhere. Maya's violin case had been sitting on the piano bench where she'd left it after her final practice session, along with her sheet music and a small notebook where she'd written practice notes and emotional reflections about the piece. Jessica had opened the case with ceremonial precision, lifting out the antique violin and examining it with mock appreciation. "This thing is so old and weird-looking," she'd said, turning it over in her hands. "I bet it doesn't even sound good." Chloe had giggled nervously, suddenly uncertain about their plan. Maybe we should just mess with her music instead, like hide it or something. But Jessica had been past the point of reasonable pranks. She'd spent months trying to break Maya's composure, to find the crack in her armor that would give Jessica the satisfaction of seeing her cry, of watching her finally fight back or break down. The violin represented everything Jessica hated about Maya: her talent, her quiet confidence, her refusal to acknowledge Jessica's social superiority. "She thinks she's so special with this stupid thing," Jessica had said, raising the violin above her head. "Let's see how special she feels when it's in pieces." The sound of the violin hitting the floor had been sickening, a crack that seemed to echo through the empty hallway. But Jessica hadn't been satisfied with just dropping it. She'd proceeded to stomp on the instrument, grinding the delicate wood under her heel until the strings snapped and the body split completely in half. Ryan had joined in, kicking the pieces across the room while Chloe had stood frozen, finally understanding that they'd crossed a line from bullying into genuine cruelty. They'd torn up Maya's sheet music as well, shredding the carefully annotated pages and scattering them like confetti. They'd ripped pages from her practice notebook, destroying months of personal reflections and musical insights. By the time they'd finished, the music room looked like a crime scene, with pieces of broken violin and torn paper covering the floor. Jessica had surveyed their handiwork with satisfaction, already imagining Maya's face when she discovered the destruction. This would finally be the moment when Maya's composure cracked, when she'd break down crying or lash out in anger, giving Jessica the dramatic reaction she'd been craving for months. The next morning, Maya had arrived at school early as usual, heading straight to the music room for her final practice session before the showcase. She'd opened the door, expecting to find her sanctuary, her safe space where she could center herself before the performance that represented her first step back into the light. Instead, she'd found devastation. Maya stood in the doorway of the music room, her backpack sliding off her shoulder to hit the floor with a dull thud. The scene before her defied immediate comprehension, as if her brain was refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. Splinters of dark wood scattered across the linoleum like fallen leaves, the twisted remains of metal strings catching the fluorescent light. Her grandmother's violin, the instrument that had traveled across oceans and through decades, lay destroyed in pieces that seemed too small to have once created such beautiful music. She moved forward slowly, each step deliberate and careful, as if sudden movement might somehow make the destruction more real. Kneeling beside the largest fragment, she picked up what had once been the violin scroll, the elegant carved spiral that her grandmother had always said looked like a frozen melody. The wood was split clean through, and Maya found herself tracing the crack with her finger, following the jagged line that had severed past from present. The sheet music lay scattered around the room like snow after a blizzard. Pages of Paganini's Caprice No. 24, mixed with her handwritten practice notes, some pieces no larger than postage stamps. Maya gathered what she could, smoothing out the wrinkled pages on the piano bench, trying to reassemble the musical puzzle that had taken her months to perfect. Most of the notation was still legible, but her personal annotations were gone, those careful reminders she'd written to herself about dynamics and emotional interpretation. Her practice notebook had suffered the worst damage. The spiral binding was intact, but most of the pages had been torn out and shredded. Maya found fragments of her own handwriting scattered across the floor, pieces of sentences that had captured her thoughts about music, about her grandmother, about the feelings she'd been trying to work through during her months of isolation. She'd written about missing her friends in Phoenix, about feeling like a ghost in the hallways of Westfield, about how playing violin was the only time she felt truly herself. Mr. Davidson found her 20 minutes later, still kneeling on the floor surrounded by the wreckage. He took one look at the scene, and his face went through a series of emotions: shock, anger, and then a deep sadness that seemed to age him 10 years in an instant. He'd been teaching for over 2 decades, and he'd seen his share of vandalism and student pranks, but this felt different. This was personal and cruel in a way that spoke to genuine malice rather than momentary poor judgment. Maya looked up at him with dry eyes, her expression so carefully controlled that it was almost frightening. Mr. Davidson had expected tears, expected the kind of emotional breakdown that any normal teenager would have after discovering such devastating destruction. Instead, Maya's face was a mask of calm that reminded him uncomfortably of the way trauma victims sometimes shut down when the pain was too overwhelming to process. Mr. Davidson immediately called the principal's office, then campus security, treating the scene like the crime scene it essentially was. He took photos with his phone, documenting the destruction from multiple angles, making sure to capture the deliberate nature of the damage. This wasn't accidental, this was systematic destruction designed to cause maximum emotional harm. Principal Garcia arrived within minutes, her usual composed demeanor cracking when she saw the extent of the vandalism. She'd dealt with plenty of student conflicts during her tenure at Westfield, but the calculated cruelty of destroying a student's personal instrument struck her as particularly vicious. She immediately began asking Maya questions about who might have done this, whether she'd received any threats, if there had been any recent conflicts with other students. Maya answered each question with the same eerily calm voice, providing facts without emotion, details without drama. Yes, she'd been having some issues with Jessica Winters and her friends. No, she hadn't reported it because she'd hoped it would stop on its own. Yes, the violin had significant sentimental value. It had belonged to her grandmother. No, she didn't think it could be repaired. Sarah Thompson from the track team had been passing by when she heard the commotion and had poked her head into the music room to see what was happening. She'd taken one look at the destruction and immediately pulled out her phone, not to take pictures of the damage, but to search for something that had been nagging at her memory. She'd been trying to place Maya's name for months, convinced she'd heard it somewhere before, but unable to make the connection. As Sarah scrolled through old sports news articles and tournament results, the pieces finally clicked into place. Maya Chen from Phoenix. The same Maya Chen who'd dominated the junior MMA circuit in Arizona, who'd been featured in a local newspaper article about young female fighters breaking barriers in combat sports. Sarah remembered watching a video of one of Maya's fights, impressed by the teenager's technical skill and composure under pressure. The Maya Chen in that video had been confident and fierce, nothing like the quiet girl who ate lunch alone in the music room. But looking at her now, seeing the way she held herself with perfect posture, despite the emotional devastation around her, Sarah could finally see the fighter beneath the shy exterior. There was something coiled and controlled about Maya's stillness that Sarah recognized from her own athletic training, the kind of self-possession that came from knowing exactly what your body was capable of. While Principal Garcia continued her investigation and Mr. Davidson worked with the custodial staff to clean up the debris, Maya excused herself to call her mother. She walked to the empty hallway outside the music room and dialed with steady fingers, waiting through 3 rings before her mother's concerned voice answered. Mrs. Chen had been expecting a call about the upcoming performance, maybe some last-minute nerves or requests for extra practice time. Instead, she heard her daughter's carefully modulated voice explaining that her violin had been destroyed, that there would be no performance at the showcase, that everything they'd worked toward over the past 6 weeks had been ruined by 3 students who thought cruelty was entertainment. The conversation was brief and factual, Maya providing details without dwelling on emotions or asking for comfort. When her mother began expressing outrage and talking about pressing charges, Maya calmly explained that the school was handling the investigation and that she just wanted to get through the rest of the day. She promised to talk more when she got home, then hung up before her mother could ask the questions that Maya wasn't ready to answer. Jessica, Chloe, and Ryan had been watching the drama unfold from the safety of Jessica's locker, which offered a clear view of the music room hallway. They'd seen the parade of adults entering and leaving, the serious expressions and urgent conversations that indicated their prank had been taken more seriously than they'd anticipated. Jessica had expected Maya to emerge from the music room in tears, to provide the dramatic breakdown that would make all the risk worthwhile. Instead, Maya had walked calmly to the hallway, made her phone call with the composure of someone ordering coffee, and then returned to help clean up the debris of her destroyed dreams. There was something unsettling about her reaction, or rather her lack of reaction, that made Jessica feel like she'd missed something important. Chloe was already expressing regret, her conscience finally catching up with her actions. She'd gone along with Jessica's plan because it had seemed like harmless mischief at the time. But seeing the actual destruction made her realize they'd crossed a line from bullying into genuine cruelty. The violin had clearly been more than just an instrument, it had been a connection to Maya's family history, and they'd severed that connection with the thoughtless brutality of children who'd never learned the difference between power and strength. Ryan was trying to play it cool, but Jessica could see the nervousness in his eyes. He'd been the most enthusiastic participant in the destruction, taking particular pleasure in kicking the violin pieces across the room. But now he was starting to understand that their actions might have serious consequences. Vandalism was a criminal offense, not just a school disciplinary issue, and his parents would not be understanding if he ended up with charges on his record. The morning passed in a blur of investigation and documentation. Security cameras were reviewed, though the music room itself wasn't monitored, and the hallway footage only showed the 3 students entering and leaving the area during the time window when the destruction occurred. Several students came forward to report that they'd seen Jessica, Chloe, and Ryan in the music hallway after hours, though none had witnessed the actual vandalism. Maya attended her classes with the same quiet efficiency she'd always shown, but her teachers noticed a difference in her demeanor. She was present, but not really there, going through the motions of note-taking and assignment completion while her mind seemed to be processing something far removed from algebra and American history. Her carefully constructed invisibility had been shattered along with her violin, and she was trying to figure out who she was supposed to be now that her secret sanctuary had been violated. During lunch, Maya sat in the cafeteria for the first time in months, choosing a table near the windows where she could watch the parking lot and think. She didn't eat much, mostly just moved food around her plate while her mind worked through the implications of what had happened. The spring music showcase was tomorrow night, and her name was still on the program. Mr. Davidson had offered to let her borrow a school violin, but Maya knew it wouldn't be the same. The piece she'd been preparing was so intimately connected to her grandmother's instrument that playing it on a different violin would feel like wearing someone else's clothes. Sarah Thompson approached Maya's table hesitantly, carrying her lunch tray and wearing the kind of expression that suggested she had something important to say, but wasn't sure how to begin. Maya looked up with polite curiosity, recognizing Sarah as one of the more decent students at Westfield, someone who'd never participated in the social hierarchy games that made high school such a minefield for outsiders. Sarah sat down across from Maya and took a deep breath before speaking. She explained that she'd been trying to place Maya's name for months, that something about her had seemed familiar, but she hadn't been able to make the connection until today. She'd finally remembered where she'd heard of Maya Chen, the fighter from Phoenix who'd been making waves in the junior MMS circuit before seemingly disappearing from competition. Maya's carefully maintained composure flickered for just a moment, surprise and something that might have been relief crossing her features before the mask slipped back into place. She confirmed Sarah's suspicions with a simple nod, acknowledging that yes, she was that Maya Chen, but offering no additional details about why she'd stopped fighting or what had brought her to Colorado. Sarah pressed gently, asking if Maya missed competing, if she planned to find a gym in Denver, if she'd given up fighting entirely. Maya's responses were careful and non-committal, but Sarah could sense the conflict beneath the surface, the tension between the person Maya had been and the person she was trying to become. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Jessica, Chloe, and Ryan, who approached Maya's table with the kind of calculated casualness that immediately put both girls on alert. Jessica was wearing her trademark fake smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes and always preceded her most cutting remarks. She'd come to assess the damage, to finally see Maya's emotional reaction to the morning's discovery, and she was prepared to twist the knife a little deeper if the opportunity presented itself. Jessica expressed mock sympathy for Maya's accident, using air quotes around the word and making it clear that she knew exactly what had happened to the violin. She suggested that maybe this was the universe's way of telling Maya that she wasn't meant to perform, that some people were better suited to staying in the background where they belonged. Maya listened to Jessica's thinly veiled threats and fake condolences with the same eerily calm expression she'd worn all morning. She didn't rise to the bait, didn't give Jessica the angry reaction or tearful breakdown that would have provided the satisfaction she was seeking. Instead, Maya simply looked at Jessica with eyes that seemed to see right through her, acknowledging her presence without giving her words any weight or importance. The lack of reaction frustrated Jessica to the point where her mask began to slip, revealing the genuine ugliness beneath her polished exterior. She began speaking louder, making her comments more pointed and personal, trying desperately to find the button that would finally make Maya crack. She criticized Maya's clothes, her lack of friends, her weird obsession with classical music, her general failure to understand how things worked at Westfield High. Sarah watched this performance with growing disgust, finally understanding the full scope of what Maya had been enduring for months. She'd known Jessica was mean, but this was systematic psychological torture disguised as social commentary. Sarah found herself wondering how Maya had maintained her composure through months of this treatment. What kind of inner strength it took to absorb this level of cruelty without breaking. Maya finished her lunch methodically, packing up her tray with the same deliberate care she brought to everything else. She stood to leave, and Jessica made one final attempt to provoke a reaction, grabbing Maya's arm and making a comment about how pathetic it was that Maya's dead grandmother's broken fiddle was the most interesting thing about her. For the first time all day, Maya's composure cracked slightly. Not in the way Jessica had been hoping for. There were no tears, no angry outburst, no dramatic confrontation. Instead, something shifted in Maya's eyes, a flicker of something cold and dangerous that lasted only a fraction of a second, before disappearing behind her usual calm mask. Maya gently removed Jessica's hand from her arm with a grip that was firm enough to make Jessica wince, though she was careful not to apply too much pressure. She looked directly into Jessica's eyes for a long moment, and Jessica found herself taking an involuntary step backward, suddenly aware that she might have seriously misjudged the quiet girl she'd been tormenting for months. Maya walked away, without saying a word, leaving Jessica, Chloe, and Ryan standing by the lunch table with the uncomfortable feeling that they'd just poked something that was much more dangerous than they'd realized. Sarah followed a few steps behind, her mind racing as she tried to process what she'd just witnessed. She'd seen that look before, in the eyes of fighters who were deciding whether their opponent was worth the effort of a real fight. The rest of the school day passed without incident, but word of the violin's destruction had spread through the student body with the speed that only high school gossip could achieve. Most students expressed genuine sympathy for Maya, recognizing the cruelty of destroying someone's personal property, especially something with clear sentimental value. A few teachers who'd heard about the incident made a point of checking on Maya during class, offering support and resources if she needed help processing what had happened. By the time the final bell rang, Principal Garcia had completed enough of her investigation to call Jessica, Chloe, and Ryan to her office for individual interviews. The security footage, combined with witness statements and the students' own guilty behavior throughout the day, had made it clear who was responsible for the vandalism. The question now was what consequences would be appropriate for an act of destruction that went far beyond typical student mischief. Maya left school that afternoon with the same quiet dignity she'd maintained all day. But Sarah noticed something different in her walk, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there in the morning. As Maya headed toward the student parking lot where her mother was waiting, Sarah found herself wondering what was going through her mind. Whether the fighter from Phoenix was finally ready to stop hiding behind the shy music student from Colorado. The spring music showcase was less than 24 hours away, and Maya's name was still on the program. Mr. Davidson had offered alternatives, a different piece, a borrowed instrument, even the option to postpone her performance to a later date. But Maya had declined all of these suggestions with polite firmness, leaving everyone wondering what she was planning for tomorrow night. As Maya climbed into her mother's car and they drove away from Westfield High, Sarah pulled out her phone and began searching for more information about Maya's fighting career. The video she found showed a composed, technical fighter who moved with the kind of precision that came from years of dedicated training. But what struck Sarah most was the look in Maya's eyes during her fights, the same calm, analytical expression she'd worn while cleaning up the debris of her destroyed violin. Maya Chen the fighter and Maya Chen the musician might have seemed like two different people, but Sarah was beginning to understand that they were both facets of the same individual, someone who'd learned to find strength in discipline, beauty in precision, and power in choosing when not to use the skills that made her dangerous. Tomorrow night's showcase was going to be very interesting indeed. The Chen family dinner table that evening was unusually quiet, even by their standards. Maya's father, David, had come home from his engineering job to find his wife pacing the kitchen with barely contained fury, and Maya sitting at the counter doing homework with an unnatural stillness that immediately set off his parental alarm bells. Mrs. Chen had already filled him in on the phone about the violin's destruction, but seeing his daughter's carefully controlled composure in person made the situation feel even more serious. Maya moved through her evening routine with mechanical precision, completing assignments, helping clear the dinner dishes, and preparing for the next school day as if nothing had changed. But her parents noticed the small details that revealed the cracks in her facade. She held her pencil too tightly while writing, leaving deep impressions on the paper beneath. She organized her backpack 3 times, checking and rechecking that everything was in its proper place. Most tellingly, she avoided looking at the corner of the living room where her violin case usually sat, the empty space now serving as a constant reminder of what had been taken from her. Mrs. Chen tried several times to draw Maya into conversation about her feelings, about what she wanted to do next, about whether she still planned to participate in tomorrow night's showcase. Each attempt was met with polite deflection and reassurances that Maya was fine, that she was handling the situation maturely, that there was no need for anyone to worry about her emotional state. The more Maya insisted she was okay, the more concerned her parents became. David Chen had immigrated to the United States as a teenager and had learned early that sometimes the best way to protect herself was to become invisible, to avoid drawing attention that might lead to conflict or confrontation. He recognized his daughter's behavior as a survival strategy he'd once employed himself, but he also understood that there were times when invisibility became its own kind of prison. He wanted to tell Maya that she didn't have to carry this burden alone, that it was okay to be angry about what had happened, but he could see that she'd retreated to a place where emotional vulnerability felt too dangerous to risk. Around 9 o'clock, Maya excused herself to go to her room, claiming she needed to prepare for tomorrow's classes. Her parents listened to her footsteps on the stairs, followed by the soft click of her bedroom door closing, and then an unusual silence that stretched on for nearly an hour. Normally, they could hear the faint sounds of Maya practicing violin through her closed door, the gentle scraping of bow against strings that had become the soundtrack to their evening routine. Instead of practicing, Maya was lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind cycling through memories she'd been trying to suppress since leaving Phoenix. She thought about her coach, Elena Vasquez, who'd taught her that true strength wasn't about being the most aggressive fighter in the gym, but about maintaining perfect control over your emotions and reactions, even when someone was trying to hurt you. Elena had drilled into her students that the moment you let anger cloud your judgment, you'd already lost the fight. Maya remembered her last conversation with Elena, the morning before her family's move to Colorado. Elena had pulled her aside after training and told her that she had the potential to go professional if she wanted to pursue fighting seriously. But she'd also warned Maya about the importance of choosing her battles wisely. "You've got something special," Elena had said, "but that gift comes with responsibility. People are going to test you, and how you respond will define who you become." At the time, Maya had thought Elena was talking about future opponents in the ring, not high school bullies who would destroy her most precious possessions out of petty cruelty. But lying in her darkened bedroom, Maya began to understand that the lesson applied to every aspect of her life. Jessica Winters was testing her just as surely as any fighter she'd faced in competition, and Maya's response would determine not just how this conflict ended, but who she would be moving forward. Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled through her old training videos, footage that her Phoenix teammates had recorded during sparring sessions and competitions. She watched herself move through combinations with fluid precision, each strike calculated and controlled, her face maintaining the same calm expression whether she was winning or losing. The contrast between that confident fighter and the invisible girl she'd become at Westfield was so stark that it felt like watching a stranger. One video in particular caught her attention. It was from her final tournament in Arizona, the regional championship, where she'd faced an opponent who'd been trash-talking her for weeks leading up to the fight. The girl had tried every psychological tactic in the book, making personal attacks about Maya's appearance, her technique, even her family background. But instead of rising to the bait, Maya had used her opponent's anger against her, staying calm and patient until the other girl made a crucial mistake that left her open for a submission hold that ended the fight. Maya remembered how Elena had praised her after that victory, not for her technical skill, but for her mental discipline. "She wanted you to fight her fight," Elena had said, "but you made her fight yours instead. That's what separates good fighters from great ones." Meanwhile, across town, Jessica Winters was having her own sleepless night, though for very different reasons. The interviews with Principal Garcia had not gone as smoothly as she'd hoped. The principal had been thorough and persistent, asking detailed questions about Jessica's whereabouts the previous evening, her relationship with Maya, and her knowledge of the violin's destruction. Jessica had tried to maintain her innocence, but she could tell that Principal Garcia didn't believe her denials. Worse yet, Jessica's father had been called in for a meeting scheduled for first thing in the morning. Robert Winters served on the school board and took pride in his family's reputation within the community. He would not be pleased to learn that his daughter was being investigated for vandalism, especially vandalism that targeted a student's personal property with such obvious malicious intent. Jessica lay in her bed replaying the day's events, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. She'd expected Maya to crumble under the pressure, to provide the dramatic emotional breakdown that would have made the risk worthwhile. Instead, Maya had remained infuriatingly composed, cleaning up the mess with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything else. There had been something almost unsettling about Maya's reaction, or lack thereof, that made Jessica question whether she really knew her target as well as she'd thought. Chloe Martinez was faring even worse than Jessica. Her conscience had been bothering her all day, and by bedtime she was seriously considering confessing everything to her parents and asking them to help her make things right. She'd never intended for things to go so far, and seeing the actual destruction had made her realize that what they'd done wasn't just mean, it was genuinely cruel in a way that crossed lines she didn't even know existed. Chloe kept thinking about The look in Maya's eyes when she'd seen the broken violin. That moment of pure devastation before Maya had locked her emotions away behind her usual mask. Chloe had siblings, and she understood the special bond that people could have with objects that connected them to family members. Destroying something that had belonged to Maya's grandmother wasn't just vandalism, it was the destruction of irreplaceable memories and family history. Ryan Parker was trying to convince himself that the whole situation was being blown out of proportion, but his bravado was cracking under the weight of potential consequences. His parents had already received a call from the school requesting a meeting, and Ryan knew they would not be understanding if he ended up facing criminal charges. His older brother had gotten into legal trouble during high school, and his parents had made it clear that they wouldn't tolerate similar behavior from Ryan. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of Pacific Northwest weather that seemed to match the somber mood hanging over Westfield High. Maya arrived at school to find that news of the violin's destruction had spread even further overnight, with students she'd never spoken to offering condolences and expressing outrage at the cruelty of the act. The attention made her uncomfortable, but she accepted the sympathy with polite gratitude while privately wishing everyone would stop treating her like a victim. Sarah Thompson was waiting by Maya's locker when she arrived, having spent most of the previous evening researching Maya's fighting career online. She'd found tournament footage, newspaper articles, and even a local TV interview from Maya's final competition in Phoenix. The contrast between the confident, articulate teenager in those videos and the quiet girl who ate lunch alone was striking, and Sarah was becoming increasingly curious about what had caused such a dramatic transformation. Sarah approached Maya carefully, not wanting to pressure her but hoping to offer genuine support from someone who understood what it meant to be an athlete. She mentioned that she'd found some of Maya's tournament footage online and had been impressed by her skill and composure under pressure. Sarah was careful not to push too hard, but she wanted Maya to know that she recognized her for who she really was, not just the shy music student she pretended to be at Westfield. Maya's response was guarded, but not dismissive. She confirmed that she'd trained seriously in Phoenix, but explained that she'd decided to focus on music instead when her family moved to Colorado. The explanation felt rehearsed, like something Maya had practiced saying to deflect further questions, but Sarah could sense the conflict beneath the surface. She got the impression that Maya's decision to quit fighting hadn't been entirely voluntary, and that there were layers to the story that Maya wasn't ready to share. The morning classes passed in a blur of whispered conversations and sideways glances, with most students now aware of what had happened to Maya's violin. Several teachers made a point of checking on Maya's emotional state, offering to excuse her from assignments or provide additional support if needed. Maya declined all offers of special treatment with polite firmness, insisting that she preferred to maintain her normal routine. During third period, Principal Garcia's voice came over the intercom calling Jessica, Chloe, and Ryan to the office. The summons sent a ripple of excitement through the school, with students immediately understanding that the investigation had reached its conclusion. Maya was in chemistry class when the announcement was made, and she noticed several classmates watching her reaction to see if she showed any satisfaction at her tormentors being called to account. Maya's expression remained neutral, but inside she felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of her was relieved that justice was finally being served, that Jessica's months of harassment would finally face consequences. But another part of her felt strangely empty, as if the vindication she'd expected to feel was being overshadowed by a deeper understanding that no punishment could undo the destruction of her grandmother's violin or repair the emotional damage that had been inflicted. Principal Garcia had spent the morning meeting with the parents of all 3 students involved in the vandalism. Robert Winters had arrived expecting to defend his daughter against false accusations, but left the meeting looking pale and shaken. After being presented with the security footage and witness statements, that made Jessica's guilt undeniable. He'd been forced to confront the reality that his daughter had engaged in behavior that was not just cruel, but potentially criminal. Chloe's parents had been more prepared for bad news, having sensed their daughter's guilt and anxiety the previous evening. They'd spent breakfast encouraging Chloe to tell the truth and accept responsibility for her actions, emphasizing that lying would only make the consequences worse. When Chloe finally confessed her role in the destruction, they were disappointed but not surprised. Ryan's parents had been the most volatile, initially denying that their son could have done such a thing, and threatening legal action if the school continued to harass their family. But when confronted with the evidence, their anger had shifted. From the school to Ryan, with his father making it clear that there would be serious consequences at home regardless of what punishment the school imposed. The individual meetings with the three students revealed the different ways they were handling their guilt and fear. Jessica maintained her innocence for nearly 20 minutes, before finally breaking down and admitting her role in the destruction. Even then, she tried to minimize her responsibility, claiming it had been meant as a harmless prank that had gotten out of hand. Principal Garcia wasn't buying the innocent act, particularly given the systematic harassment that had preceded the vandalism. Chloe confessed immediately and tearfully, expressing genuine remorse for her actions and asking what she could do to make amends. Her obvious guilt and desire to make things right earned her some consideration, though Principal Garcia made it clear that remorse didn't erase the severity of what had been done. Ryan tried to shift blame to Jessica, claiming he'd just gone along with her plan without understanding how far she intended to take things. His attempts to portray himself as a reluctant participant were undermined by witness accounts of his enthusiastic participation in destroying the violin, particularly his decision to kick the pieces across the room after Jessica had initially broken the instrument. By lunchtime, word had spread that all three students were facing suspension and would be required to make full restitution for the destroyed violin. The news was met with general approval from the student body, most of whom felt that the punishment was appropriate for such a cruel act. Maya heard about the consequences secondhand from other students, and found herself feeling oddly detached from the whole situation, as if she was watching someone else's drama play out rather than experiencing justice for the wrong done to her. The afternoon brought an unexpected development when Mr. Davidson approached Maya between classes with a proposal that caught her completely off guard. He'd been contacted by several community members who'd heard about the violin's destruction and wanted to help. A local violin maker had offered to donate an instrument for Maya to use, and several musicians had volunteered to help her prepare a different piece for the showcase if she was still willing to perform. Maya's first instinct was to decline the offer, to maintain her decision to withdraw from the showcase rather than accept charity from strangers. But something in Mr. Davidson's expression made her pause and actually consider the possibility. He wasn't just offering her a replacement instrument, he was offering her a chance to reclaim her voice, to stand up and show everyone that she wouldn't be silenced by cruelty. The loaned violin was beautiful, a modern instrument with a warm, rich tone that reminded Maya of her grandmother's violin without being an exact replacement. Mr. Davidson had also found simplified sheet music for several pieces that would be impressive but achievable with only a few hours of preparation. He wasn't asking Maya to recreate her months of work on the Paganini piece, but he was giving her the opportunity to still participate in the showcase if she chose to. Maya held the borrowed violin for several minutes, testing its weight and balance, drawing the bow across the strings to hear its voice. The sound was different from her grandmother's instrument, but it was undeniably beautiful, with a clarity and projection that filled the empty music room with warmth. For the first time since discovering the destruction, Maya felt a flicker of the passion that had driven her to practice for hours every day. But as she considered Mr. Davidson's offer, Maya realized that her decision about the showcase had implications far beyond just playing music. Jessica Winters and her friends had tried to silence her, to force her back into the shadows where they thought she belonged. Accepting the loaned violin and performing at the showcase would be a statement that their cruelty hadn't achieved its intended goal, that Maya Chen couldn't be broken by the petty machinations of high school bullies. On the other hand, Maya understood that stepping into the spotlight would mean abandoning the carefully constructed invisibility that had protected her for months. If she performed at the showcase, she would be making herself visible again, acknowledging that she had talents and ambitions that extended beyond just surviving high school. She would be claiming space and demanding attention, things that felt dangerous after months of deliberately fading into the background. As Maya stood in the music room holding the borrowed violin, she found herself thinking about Elena's teachings about choosing your battles wisely. This wasn't just about music or even about responding to bullying. This was about deciding who she wanted to be and how she wanted to move through the world. She could continue hiding behind her shy exterior, letting people like Jessica define the terms of her existence, or she could step forward and reclaim the confidence that had once made her a champion. The final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day and the beginning of the evening that would culminate in the spring music showcase. Maya had less than 6 hours to decide whether she would perform, and if so, what piece she would choose to represent this pivotal moment in her high school experience. The decision felt much larger than just selecting music. It felt like choosing between the person she'd been and the person she was ready to become. As students filed out of the building, heading home to prepare for the evening's events, Maya remained in the music room with the borrowed violin, working through scales and simple exercises to familiarize herself with the instrument's unique characteristics. Each note she played felt like a small act of rebellion against the forces that had tried to silence her, and with every passing minute, her decision became clearer. The showcase would begin in 6 hours, and Maya Chen was going to be ready. The Westfield High auditorium buzzed with the nervous energy that always accompanied the spring music showcase. Parents filled the front rows, smartphones ready to capture their children's performances, while students clustered in groups throughout the theater, some supporting friends and others attending for the social credit of being seen at a school event. The stage lights cast dramatic shadows across the burgundy curtains, and the smell of rosin and nervous perspiration hung in the air like incense. Maya stood in the wings, the borrowed violin case heavy in her hands, watching through a gap in the curtains as the auditorium continued to fill. She'd made her decision 3 hours earlier, alone in the music room with nothing but the sound of her own breathing and the weight of Elena's words echoing in her memory. She would perform tonight, not the Paganini piece she'd spent months perfecting, but something else entirely, something that would serve as both a farewell to her grandmother and a declaration of who she was choosing to become. Mr. Davidson appeared beside her, his usual pre-show anxiety barely contained beneath his encouraging smile. He'd been checking on all his students throughout the evening, but Maya could tell he was particularly concerned about her mental state. She'd seemed calm during their brief rehearsal earlier, but there was something different in her demeanor, a quiet intensity that he couldn't quite read. Maya had chosen to perform Bach's Partita No. 2 in D minor, specifically the famous Chaconne movement, a piece that was technically demanding but emotionally devastating in its beauty. It was a composition that required not just skill, but genuine understanding of loss and redemption, themes that felt painfully relevant to her current situation. The piece was also one that her grandmother had attempted to teach her years earlier, though Maya had been too young and impatient to appreciate its complexity at the time. The auditorium lights dimmed as Principal Garcia took the stage to welcome the audience and introduce the evening's program. Maya could see Jessica, Chloe, and Ryan sitting in the back rows, their presence a reminder that not everyone in the audience was there to support the performers. Jessica had been suspended for the remainder of the week, But the showcase fell on a school-sponsored event that she was technically allowed to attend as long as she didn't cause disruptions. Jessica had come tonight with mixed feelings, part curiosity and part defiance. She wanted to see if Maya would actually have the courage to perform after everything that had happened, and she was prepared to judge whatever replacement piece Maya had managed to cobble together in the past 24 hours. Jessica still couldn't understand why everyone was treating the destruction of an old violin like it was such a serious crime, and she was eager to see Maya fail in front of the entire school community. The first few performances went smoothly, with various students showcasing their talents on piano, flute, and voice. Maya watched from the wings, using the time to center herself and connect with the borrowed instrument that would soon become an extension of her emotions. She'd spent the afternoon learning its quirks and tendencies, adjusting her technique to accommodate its slightly different response and tone quality. Sarah Thompson had secured a seat in the third row, having convinced several of her track teammates to attend the showcase in a show of support for Maya. Sarah had also done something that Maya didn't know about. She'd used her social media connections to spread word about Maya's performance, framing it as a moment of triumph over adversity that people shouldn't miss. As a result, the auditorium was more packed than usual, with students who normally wouldn't attend a classical music event filling seats throughout the theater. When Mr. Davidson took the stage to introduce Maya, the auditorium grew unusually quiet, as if the audience sensed they were about to witness something significant. He spoke briefly about Maya's talent and dedication, mentioning that she would be performing, despite the recent challenges she'd faced, though he was careful not to provide specific details about the violin's destruction. Maya walked onto the stage carrying the borrowed violin with the same composed dignity she'd maintained throughout the crisis. She was wearing a simple black dress that her mother had helped her select, elegant but not flashy, appropriate for both the solemnity of the piece and the statement she was making about resilience in the face of cruelty. As she reached center stage, the auditorium fell completely silent, 300 people holding their breath in anticipation. Maya took her position and closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out the audience and the pressure and the memory of her grandmother's destroyed violin. When she opened them again, she looked directly toward the section where Jessica was sitting, making eye contact for just a moment before raising the borrowed instrument to her shoulder. The opening notes of the chaconne filled the auditorium with a haunting beauty that immediately captivated the audience. Maya's technique was flawless, but more importantly, her interpretation was deeply personal, each phrase carrying emotional weight that spoke to loss and recovery, to finding strength in the midst of devastation. The borrowed violin sang under her touch, its voice clear and true as she navigated the piece's technical challenges with apparent effortlessness. As Maya played, something remarkable happened in the auditorium. Students who had come expecting a typical high school performance found themselves genuinely moved by the music, drawn into the emotional landscape that Maya was creating with each carefully crafted phrase. Parents who had been checking their phones put their devices away and gave Maya their complete attention. Even the technical crew backstage stopped their preparations to listen to the extraordinary performance taking place on their stage. Jessica felt increasingly uncomfortable as the performance continued, realizing that Maya was not just competent, but genuinely gifted in a way that made Jessica's own accomplishments seem shallow by comparison. The music was doing something that Jessica hadn't expected it was making Maya visible in a way that commanded respect rather than pity, admiration rather than sympathy. This wasn't the broken victim that Jessica had been trying to create through months of harassment. About halfway through the piece, Maya began to incorporate subtle variations into her interpretation, small personal touches that transformed Batch's composition into something uniquely her own. These weren't random improvisations but carefully considered artistic choices that demonstrated not just technical skill, but genuine musical intelligence. She was having a conversation with the composer across centuries, adding her own voice to a dialogue that had been ongoing since the piece was first written. Sarah Thompson found herself crying without realizing it, moved by the combination of Maya's obvious talent and the courage it had taken to step onto that stage after everything she'd endured. Sarah was also beginning to understand the connection between Maya's musical discipline and her fighting background. Both required the same kind of mental focus, the same ability to perform under pressure, the same dedication to perfectionism that separated good practitioners from exceptional ones. The technical demands of the chaconne required Maya to demonstrate skills that would have been impressive in a professional setting, let alone a high school showcase. Double stops, rapid arpeggios, and complex chord progressions flowed from her fingers with a precision that silenced any doubts about her qualifications to be performing such an ambitious piece. But the technical mastery was secondary to the emotional honesty of her interpretation, the way she used Batch's framework to tell her own story of loss and resilience. As the piece built toward its climactic passages, Maya's playing became even more intense, her entire body moving with the music as she drew sounds from the borrowed violin that seemed impossible given the instrument's modest origins. The audience was completely captivated, drawn into a musical experience that transcended the typical expectations of a student performance. Principal Garcia, watching from the side of the auditorium, realized she was witnessing something special. A moment that would be remembered long after the other performances of the evening had faded from memory. She found herself thinking about the cruelty that had led to this moment, about how Jessica's attempt to destroy Maya's spirit had instead created an opportunity for Maya to reveal her true strength to the entire school community. The final pages of the chaconne required Maya to demonstrate not just technical skill but genuine artistry, using silence and space as effectively as she used sound to create an emotional crescendo that left the audience breathless. As she approached the piece's conclusion, Maya allowed herself to think about her grandmother, about the lessons learned in that small Phoenix apartment, about the journey that had brought her to this stage on this night. The final notes rang out across the auditorium with crystalline clarity, hanging in the air for several seconds before gradually fading into silence. Maya lowered her violin and bow, standing perfectly still as the audience processed what they had just experienced. For a moment, the auditorium remained completely quiet, as if 300 people were afraid to break the spell that Maya's performance had cast over them. Then the applause began, starting slowly but building rapidly into a sustained ovation. That lasted nearly 2 minutes. Students who had never shown interest in classical music were on their feet, cheering for a performance that had exceeded everyone's expectations. Parents wiped away tears, moved by the combination of technical excellence and emotional honesty they had just witnessed. Maya acknowledged the applause with a simple bow, her composure intact but her eyes bright with an emotion that might have been relief or joy or vindication. She had done more than just perform a difficult piece of music. She had reclaimed her voice and announced to everyone present that she would not be silenced by cruelty or intimidated by those who mistook kindness for weakness. As Maya left the stage, still carrying the borrowed violin that had served her so well, she was surrounded by classmates offering congratulations and expressions of amazement. Students who had barely acknowledged her existence for months were eager to talk to her, to be associated with someone who had just delivered such an extraordinary performance. Mr. Davidson found her in the wings, his own eyes damp with emotion as he congratulated her on what he described as one of the finest student performances he'd witnessed in his teaching career. He told Maya that she had a gift that extended far beyond technical skill, that her ability to communicate emotion through music was something that couldn't be taught, only nurtured and developed. Jessica remained in her seat as the audience began to file out for intermission, her friends having abandoned her to join the crowd surrounding Maya backstage. For the first time in months, Jessica found herself truly alone, forced to confront the reality that her campaign of harassment had not only failed, but had actually provided Maya with an opportunity to demonstrate qualities that Jessica herself lacked. Chloe Martinez had been crying throughout Maya's performance, overwhelmed by guilt and by the recognition of what they had tried to destroy. The music had made it clear that Maya's talent was genuine and extraordinary, not the pretentious hobby that Jessica had dismissed it as. Chloe realized that they hadn't just broken an old violin, they had attempted to silence something beautiful and rare, something that the world was better for hearing. Sarah Thompson managed to make her way backstage, where she found Maya accepting congratulations from a steady stream of classmates and teachers. When Sarah finally got Maya's attention, she simply said that the performance had been incredible and that she was proud to know her. Maya's response was characteristically modest, but Sarah could see a confidence in her eyes that had been missing for months. The second half of the showcase continued with the remaining student performances, but it was clear that Maya's chicane had been the evening's defining moment. The other students did their best, and many delivered excellent performances, but none could match the combination of technical skill and emotional impact that Maya had achieved. As the evening wound down and the auditorium began to empty, Maya found herself in the music room with Mr. Davidson, carefully packing the borrowed violin while reflecting on the night's events. Mr. Davidson told her that several people had approached him during intermission, including a local music teacher who was interested in providing Maya with advanced instruction and a representative from the State University's music program who wanted to discuss scholarship opportunities. Maya listened to these possibilities with interest, but without the desperate eagerness that might have characterized her response a year earlier. The performance had reminded her of her love for music, but it had also clarified her understanding of herself as someone who didn't need external validation to feel worthy or complete. She was grateful for the opportunities that might come from tonight's performance, but she was also confident that she would continue to grow and develop regardless of what doors opened or closed. Principal Garcia found Maya as she was preparing to leave, offering personal congratulations and also providing an update on the consequences facing Jessica, Chloe, and Ryan. All three students would be completing community service related to arts education, with Jessica facing additional disciplinary measures due to her role as the ringleader. More importantly, the incident had prompted a school-wide discussion about bullying and the importance of supporting rather than tearing down students who dared to be different. Maya's parents were waiting in the lobby, their faces glowing with pride and relief. They had watched their daughter reclaim her confidence and her voice in the most public way possible, and they understood that tonight marked a turning point in her journey toward finding her place in their new community. The drive home was filled with excited conversation about the performance and the positive responses Maya had received from classmates and teachers. That night, Maya sat in her bedroom looking at the empty corner where her grandmother's violin case had once rested. The borrowed instrument was safely returned to Mr. Davidson, but Maya knew that she would soon have her own violin again, whether through the school's insurance claim or through her own efforts to replace what had been lost. More importantly, she understood that the music itself had never been destroyed. It had simply been waiting for her to find the courage to set it free. Jessica Winters spent that same evening alone in her room, scrolling through social media posts about Maya's performance and gradually understanding the magnitude of what she had tried to destroy. The video clips and photos showed Maya surrounded by admirers, basking in well-deserved recognition for her extraordinary talent. Jessica realized that her months of harassment had ultimately backfired, transforming Maya from an invisible target into a respected member of the school community. The following Monday, Maya walked through the hallways of Westfield High with her head held high for the first time since arriving in Colorado. Students who had previously ignored her now offered greetings and congratulations, and several teachers made a point of acknowledging her remarkable performance. The invisibility that had once protected her was gone, replaced by a visibility that she had chosen rather than one that had been forced upon her. Sarah Thompson found Maya at lunch and invited her to sit with the track team, an invitation that Maya accepted with genuine gratitude. As they talked about the weekend's events and the upcoming week's activities, Maya realized that she had finally found what she'd been missing since leaving Phoenix, a sense of belonging that was based on mutual respect rather than shared fear. Jessica, Chloe, and Ryan returned to school that week to find their social dynamics fundamentally altered. Jessica's reputation as someone worth following had been damaged by the revelation of her cruelty, and several students who had previously sought her approval now kept their distance. Chloe had already begun reaching out to Maya, hoping to make genuine amends for her role in the violin's destruction. Ryan remained defiant but isolated, his attempts to minimize his responsibility, earning him criticism even from his former friends. Maya's performance had created ripple effects that extended far beyond that single evening. Several other students who had been hiding their own talents or interests began to step forward, inspired by Maya's example of turning vulnerability into strength. The music program saw an increase in enrollment, and Mr. Davidson reported that the general attitude toward the arts had improved dramatically throughout the school. Over the following weeks, Maya began to find a balance between her musical identity and her fighting background, no longer feeling the need to completely suppress either aspect of herself. She found a local MMA gym where she could train casually, maintaining her physical conditioning without the pressure of competition. She also began working with the university instructor that Mr. Davidson had connected her with, developing her musical skills while exploring potential college opportunities. The borrowed violin had been replaced by a beautiful new instrument, purchased through a combination of insurance money and community donations from people who had heard about Maya's story and wanted to support her musical development. The new violin had its own voice and character, different from her grandmother's instrument but equally capable of expressing the full range of human emotion. Maya's transformation from invisible outsider to respected community member hadn't happened overnight, and there were still moments of adjustment and uncertainty. But the spring music showcase had marked a definitive turning point, the moment when she had chosen to stop hiding and start living fully as herself. She had learned that true strength wasn't about being able to defeat your enemies in combat, but about having the courage to be vulnerable, to share your gifts with the world, even when that world had given you reasons to retreat. The story of Maya Chen's destroyed violin and triumphant performance had become part of Westfield High's institutional memory, a reminder that cruelty often reveals more about the perpetrator than the victim, and that some people become more beautiful when they're broken, not because of the breaking, but because of how they choose to heal. 6 months later, as Maya prepared for her senior year and began seriously considering colleges with strong music programs, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from the shadows of the music room to the center stage of her own life. The path hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when staying invisible seemed safer than risking exposure and potential failure. But Maya had learned that safety and growth were often incompatible, that the person she wanted to become could only emerge when she had the courage to step into the light and let the world see who she really was. The violin that Jessica had tried to destroy had been replaced, but more importantly, the silence that Maya had imposed on herself had been broken by her own choice and on her own terms. Maya Chen had found her voice, and she was never going to let anyone take it away again. The morning after the spring music showcase dawned crisp and clear, with sunlight streaming through the windows of the Chen household in a way that seemed to illuminate everything with fresh possibility. Maya woke naturally for the first time in months, without the tight knot of anxiety that had become her unwelcome alarm clock since arriving in Colorado. She lay in bed for several minutes, replaying the events of the previous evening, still hardly believing that she had found the courage to step onto that stage and reclaim her voice in front of 300 people. Her phone buzzed with notification after notification, messages from classmates she barely knew offering congratulations, friend requests from students who had previously treated her as invisible, and even a few messages from musicians in the local community who had heard about her performance through word of mouth. Maya scrolled through the responses with a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment, still adjusting to the idea that she was no longer the anonymous girl in the back corner of every classroom. Downstairs, her parents were already up and animated in a way she hadn't seen since their move to Colorado. Her father was reading messages from relatives in California who had somehow heard about Maya's performance through the family network, while her mother was researching local music teachers and summer programs that might help Maya continue developing her skills. The energy in the house felt different, charged with the kind of optimism that comes when a family crisis resolves in unexpected triumph rather than predicted disaster. Maya joined her parents at the breakfast table, where her mother immediately began sharing the various opportunities that had already emerged from the previous night's performance. A violin instructor from the Denver Symphony had left a voicemail expressing interest in providing Maya with advanced coaching. The local newspaper wanted to do a feature story about Maya's resilience and talent. 3 different colleges had reached out through Mr. Davidson to express preliminary interest in Maya's musical abilities. But perhaps most significantly, Alina Vasquez had somehow gotten Mrs. Chen's phone number and called the house that morning. Maya's former coach had seen a video of the performance that one of Maya's Phoenix friends had shared on social media, and she wanted to talk to Maya about balancing her artistic and athletic identities rather than feeling forced to choose between them. Elena had always believed that Maya's fighting skills and musical talents were connected, both requiring the same kind of disciplined focus and emotional control that separated good practitioners from exceptional ones. Maya listened to her parents' excitement with genuine appreciation, but she also felt a curious sense of detachment from all the external validation and opportunity. The performance had given her something more valuable than recognition or future prospects. It had reminded her of who she was beneath all the careful camouflage she'd constructed to survive high school. She was someone who could create beauty under pressure, who could transform pain into art, who could choose grace over revenge even when revenge would have been justified. The drive to school that Monday morning felt like entering a different universe than the one Maya had inhabited for the past 6 months. Students who had previously looked through her as if she didn't exist now made eye contact and offered genuine smiles. Teachers who had known her only as a quiet, competent presence in their classrooms now stopped her in the hallway to express their amazement at her talent and their pride in her courage. Maya's first period English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, asked her to stay after class to discuss an opportunity that had emerged over the weekend. The local arts council had been looking for a student representative to serve on their youth advisory board, and Maya's performance had brought her to their attention as someone who embodied both artistic excellence and personal resilience. The position would involve working with other young artists in the community, providing input on programming decisions, and helping to identify ways to better support student creativity. During lunch, Maya found herself surrounded by students eager to connect with her, including several who admitted they had never really noticed her before, but were now curious about her background and interests. Sarah Thompson had saved Maya a seat at the track team's table, where the conversation quickly turned to the ways that different types of performance athleticism, music, theater, debate required similar mental skills and emotional preparation. Maya shared stories about her fighting background for the first time since arriving in Colorado, explaining how the discipline required for martial arts had translated directly to her musical practice routine. She talked about the mental preparation required for competition, the importance of staying calm under pressure, and the way that physical training had taught her to push through discomfort in pursuit of excellence. The other athletes at the table immediately understood these concepts in a way that made Maya feel genuinely seen and accepted. Jessica Winters was notably absent from school that day, having been suspended for the remainder of the week as part of her punishment for the violin incident. But her absence was felt more as relief than as loss, with several students commenting on how much more relaxed the social atmosphere felt without her constant undercurrent of judgment and cruelty. Some of Jessica's former followers were beginning to question their own participation in the culture of exclusion and meanness that had defined their social group. Chloe Martinez approached Maya during the passing period before fifth hour, her eyes red from crying and her hands shaking with nervousness. She had spent the weekend writing and rewriting a letter of apology, trying to find words that could somehow convey the depth of her remorse without making excuses for her actions. Chloe handed Maya the letter and began speaking quickly, explaining that she understood if Maya never wanted to forgive her, but that watching the performance had made her realize the magnitude of what they had tried to destroy. Maya read the letter carefully, recognizing the genuine anguish in Chloe's words and the obvious effort she had put into trying to make amends. The apology didn't erase the pain of the destroyed violin or the months of harassment that had preceded it, but it represented something important: the acknowledgement that what had happened was genuinely wrong and that the people responsible were capable of recognizing their mistakes. Maya folded the letter carefully and looked at Chloe with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. She told Chloe that she appreciated the apology and that she recognized it had taken courage to approach her directly. Maya also explained that forgiveness was a process rather than a single decision, and that rebuilding trust would require consistent actions over time, not just words of regret. Ryan Parker, meanwhile, was struggling to adjust to the social consequences of his role in the violin's destruction. Several of his friends had distanced themselves from him after learning about his enthusiastic participation in the vandalism, and his attempts to minimize his responsibility had only made his situation worse. Ryan had expected the incident to blow over quickly, but Maya's performance had elevated the story into something larger, a community conversation about the importance of supporting rather than tearing down people who dared to be different. Mr. Davidson found Maya in the music room during her free period, where she was experimenting with the loaner violin that had served her so well during the showcase. He brought news that the insurance settlement for her grandmother's destroyed violin had been finalized, providing enough money to purchase a high-quality replacement instrument. He had also been contacted by several local musicians who wanted to donate instruments and sheet music to ensure that Maya had everything she needed to continue developing her skills. But Mr. Davidson's most significant news involved an opportunity that he wasn't sure Maya would be ready for so soon after the previous night's triumph. The Regional Youth Orchestra was holding emergency auditions to fill a violin position that had opened unexpectedly when another student moved out of state. The audition would be in 2 weeks, and Mr. Davidson believed Maya had the talent to earn the spot, but he wanted to make sure she was emotionally prepared for the pressure and exposure that would come with joining such a prestigious ensemble. Maya considered the opportunity carefully, weighing her natural inclination toward caution against her newfound understanding of what could happen when she chose to trust in her abilities rather than hide from them. The youth orchestra would mean performing with some of the most talented young musicians in the state, traveling to competitions and festivals, and stepping even further into the spotlight that had once felt so threatening. After several minutes of thoughtful silence, Maya told Mr. Davidson that she would like to audition. She explained that the previous night had taught her something important about the difference between being seen and being truly visible. Being seen meant allowing others to define you, to put you in categories that made them comfortable. Being truly visible meant showing up as yourself, completely and authentically, regardless of whether that made other people comfortable or not. The afternoon brought another unexpected development when Principal Garcia called Maya to her office to discuss the broader implications of the violin incident and its resolution. Principal Garcia had been reflecting on the school's culture and the systems that had allowed Jessica's harassment to continue for months without intervention. She wanted Maya's input on policy changes that might help prevent similar situations in the future and better support students who found themselves targeted by their peers. Maya appreciated being asked for her perspective, but she was also careful to emphasize that her experience was just one story among many. She suggested that the school might benefit from creating more opportunities for students to showcase different types of talents and interests, breaking down the rigid social hierarchies that made some students feel entitled to judge and exclude others. She also recommended better training for teachers and staff on recognizing the signs of systematic harassment before it escalated to the level of property destruction. The conversation with Principal Garcia led to Maya being invited to join a student advisory committee that was being formed to address issues of inclusion and school climate. The committee would include representatives from different social groups and activity areas, working together to identify problems and propose solutions that would make Westfield High a more welcoming environment for all students. That evening, Maya sat in her bedroom with her phone, scrolling through the videos that various audience members had taken of her performance the night before. Watching herself play from the audience's perspective was strange and illuminating, allowing her to see what others had seen when she stepped onto that stage and claimed her space in the spotlight. In the videos, Maya could see the transformation that had occurred during the performance itself. She started the piece looking nervous and uncertain, but as the music progressed, her posture straightened, her movements became more confident, and her connection with the audience grew stronger. By the final measures, she looked like a completely different person than the shy girl who had been eating lunch alone just days earlier. Maya's phone rang, interrupting her reflection, and she was surprised to see Elena Vasquez's name on the caller ID. Her former coach's voice was warm and proud, full of the same energy that had made training sessions feel like celebrations rather than workouts. Elena told Maya that she had been following her story through mutual friends and social media, and that she wanted Maya to know how proud she was of the way Maya had handled the situation. Elena also had a proposal that caught Maya completely off guard. She was planning to visit Denver the following month for a martial arts conference, and she wanted to meet with Maya to discuss the possibility of training together again, not for competition necessarily, but as a way of maintaining the physical and mental discipline that had served Maya so well in both fighting and music. Elena explained that she had seen too many talented young athletes abandon their training completely when they shifted focus to other pursuits, only to discover later that they missed the structure and confidence that martial arts had provided. She believed that Maya could benefit from maintaining her fighting skills as a complement to her musical development, using each discipline to strengthen the other rather than treating them as competing interests. Maya was intrigued by Elena's proposal, but she also wanted time to think about what it would mean to openly embrace both sides of her identity. For months, she had kept her fighting background completely separate from her life at Westfield, afraid that revealing her physical capabilities would somehow change how people saw her or create expectations she wasn't ready to meet. But the previous night's performance had taught her something important about the power of authenticity. The audience had responded so strongly to her music, not just because of her technical skill, but because of the emotional honesty she had brought to the performance. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable on stage, to share her pain and her strength without reservation, and the result had been a connection that transcended typical performer-audience relationships. Maya realized that the same principle might apply to other aspects of her identity. Perhaps hiding her fighting background wasn't protecting her from judgment, so much as it was preventing her from forming genuine connections with people who might appreciate and understand her completely. Perhaps being truly visible meant embracing all of her capabilities and interests, rather than presenting a carefully edited version of herself. The next morning brought news that the video of Maya's performance had gone viral within the local community, shared hundreds of times across various social media platforms, and generating comments from people throughout the Denver metro area. Several local news stations had reached out to request interviews, and a classical music blog had written a feature story about Maya's resilience and talent. Maya was hesitant about the media attention, preferring to focus on the personal growth and community connections that had emerged from her experience. But Mr. Davidson and Principal Garcia both encouraged her to consider sharing her story more broadly, suggesting that her experience of overcoming bullying through artistic expression could inspire other young people facing similar challenges. After careful consideration, Maya agreed to participate in one interview with the local PBS affiliate, a decision that felt consistent with her new commitment to visibility without being overwhelmed by publicity. She wanted to use the opportunity to talk about the importance of supporting, rather than tearing down people who dared to be different, and to encourage other students to pursue their passions despite social pressure to conform. The interview, when it aired the following week, was thoughtful and inspiring, focusing on Maya's journey from isolation to community rather than sensationalizing the bullying incident. Maya spoke eloquently about the role that both music and martial arts had played in developing her confidence and resilience, and she challenged viewers to think about the ways they could better support the young people in their own communities. The response to the interview was overwhelmingly positive, with messages pouring in from students, parents, and educators who had been moved by Maya's story and her message. Several other schools reached out to request presentations about bullying, prevention, and the importance of arts education, leading to Maya's first opportunities to speak publicly about her experiences. 3 weeks after the Spring Music Showcase, Maya walked into her audition for the Regional Youth Orchestra, carrying a new violin that had been selected with care and love to honor both her grandmother's memory and her own artistic future. Instrument was beautiful and responsive, with a tone that seemed perfectly suited to Maya's playing style and emotional range. The audition room was intimidating, filled with accomplished musicians and experienced instructors who had heard hundreds of talented students over the years. But Maya no longer felt intimidated by the prospect of being evaluated or judged. She had learned that her worth as a person and as an artist wasn't determined by other people's opinions, but by her own commitment to growth and authenticity. Maya performed 2 pieces for the audition committee, the same Bat Shakan that had captivated the audience at the Spring Music Showcase, and a Mozart concerto that showcased her technical precision and interpretive maturity. Both performances were met with enthusiastic approval from the committee, who praised not only Maya's skill but also her poise and musicality. When the results were announced a week later, Maya had not only earned a spot in the youth orchestra, but had been selected as the principal second violin, a position that recognized both her talent and her potential for leadership within the ensemble. The news was met with celebration throughout the Westfield High community, where Maya's success was seen as a victory for everyone who had supported her journey from invisibility to prominence. Jessica Winters returned to school the week after Maya's orchestra audition, her suspension completed, but her social status fundamentally altered. The students who had once competed for her attention now kept their distance, and several former friends had openly criticized her treatment of Maya. Jessica found herself in the unfamiliar position of being socially isolated, experiencing for the first time the kind of exclusion she had inflicted on others for years. The irony was not lost on Maya, who watched Jessica's struggle with a mixture of sympathy and detachment. Maya had learned that true power came not from controlling others, but from controlling yourself, not from tearing others down, but from building yourself up. She felt no satisfaction in Jessica's fall from grace, recognizing it as the natural consequence of choices rather than justice in any meaningful sense. Maya's involvement with the youth orchestra opened doors she had never imagined possible. She was invited to participate in summer music festivals, to work with renowned instructors, and to perform in venues throughout the region. Each opportunity built on the last, creating a trajectory of growth and achievement that felt both exciting and sustainable. But perhaps more importantly, Maya's experience had inspired changes throughout the Westfield High community. The student advisory committee she had joined was implementing new programs to celebrate diverse talents and interests. The arts program was receiving increased support and funding, and individual students were finding the courage to pursue their own passions. Despite social pressure to conform to narrow definitions of what was acceptable or cool, Chloe Martinez had become one of Maya's most unexpected allies, using her own experience of participating in cruelty to educate other students about the real impact of bullying and exclusion. Chloe's journey from perpetrator to advocate was difficult and sometimes painful, but it represented the kind of genuine transformation that made forgiveness possible and meaningful. Maya's story had also reached beyond the immediate school community, inspiring discussions about bullying prevention, arts education, and the importance of supporting young people who dared to be different. She received letters from students across the country who had been moved by her example and encouraged to pursue their own talents despite obstacles and opposition. 6 months after the destruction of her grandmother's violin, Maya stood on stage with the regional youth orchestra preparing for their season opening concert. She was wearing a formal black dress similar to the one she had worn for the spring music showcase, but everything else about the situation was different. She was surrounded by talented musicians who respected her abilities, performing for an audience that had come specifically to hear beautiful music, representing a community that valued and supported artistic expression. As the conductor raised his baton to begin the evening's first piece, Maya felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. The destruction of her grandmother's violin had felt like an ending, but it had actually been a beginning, the start of a process of discovering who she was meant to become when she stopped hiding and started living fully as herself. Maya had learned that some of life's most devastating experiences could become doorways to unexpected growth and opportunity, but only if you had the courage to walk through them rather than allowing them to define and limit you. She had discovered that true strength came not from the ability to overpower others, but from the choice to transform pain into beauty, cruelty into compassion, and isolation into community. The music that filled the concert hall that evening was magnificent, a celebration of human creativity and collaboration that reminded everyone present of what was possible when people chose to build each other up rather than tear each other down. Maya's violin sang with joy and confidence, adding her voice to a chorus of artists who had found their way to each other through their shared commitment to excellence and beauty. As the final notes of the evening's program faded into appreciative silence followed by thunderous applause, Maya knew that she had finally found her place in the world, not as someone who hid in the shadows to avoid conflict, but as someone who stepped into the light to create something beautiful. She had learned that visibility was a choice, that strength was a practice, and that the most powerful response to cruelty was often the decision to refuse to let it diminish your capacity for joy and creativity. Maya Chen had found her voice, and she was never going to let anyone silence it again. 2 years had passed since the night Maya Chen walked onto the Westfield High stage and transformed herself from invisible victim to celebrated artist with a single performance. Now a junior at the University of Colorado's prestigious music conservatory, Maya stood before her dorm room mirror, adjusting her formal concert attire, preparing for what would be the most significant performance of her young career. Tonight, she would be featured as a soloist with the Denver Symphony Orchestra, performing the same Paganini Caprice, No. 24, that she had been preparing when her grandmother's violin was destroyed. The irony was not lost on her that the piece which had once represented everything she'd lost would now mark her emergence as a professional artist. The new violin she carried was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, selected after months of careful evaluation and purchased with funds from her first recording contract. But more than the instrument itself, what had changed was Maya's understanding of where her music truly came from, not from wood and strings, but from the depths of her own experience and the courage to share that experience with the world. Maya's roommate, Jessica Kim, watched her friend's pre-performance ritual with admiration and slight bewilderment. Jessica was a piano major from Seoul who had quickly become Maya's closest friend at the conservatory. Drawn to Maya's unique combination of technical excellence and emotional authenticity, Jessica often marveled at Maya's ability to remain centered and focused before major performances, never realizing that this composure had been forged in the crucible of high school bullying and public humiliation. The two friends had spent countless hours in practice rooms together, pushing each other to achieve higher levels of artistry, while also providing emotional support during the inevitable challenges of pursuing excellence in such a competitive field. Jessica knew pieces of Maya's backstory: the destroyed violin, the bullying, the dramatic performance that had changed everything, but Maya had never shared the full depth of what she had endured, or how profoundly it had shaped her approach to music and life. As Maya gathered her music and prepared to leave for the concert hall, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The path from that devastated music room to tonight's featured performance had been neither straight nor simple. There had been moments of doubt, setbacks that tested her resolve, and choices that required her to continually redefine what success meant to her, personally rather than accepting others' definitions. The drive to Bocher Concert Hall took Maya through the heart of Denver, past neighborhoods where she had spent countless hours training at the a gym Elena had helped her find after moving to Colorado. Maya had indeed maintained her fighting skills alongside her musical development, discovering that Elena had been right about each discipline strengthening the other. The physical conditioning required for martial arts enhanced her endurance during long practice sessions, while the mental focus required for musical performance improved her tactical awareness in the ring. More importantly, maintaining both identities had taught Maya that she didn't have to choose between different aspects of herself to be accepted or successful. She could be both artist and athlete, both gentle and fierce, both vulnerable and strong. This integration had become central to her identity as a performer, allowing her to bring a unique depth and authenticity to her musical interpretations that distinguished her from technically proficient but emotionally reserved musicians. Elena was flying in from Phoenix specifically to attend tonight's performance, their relationship having evolved from coach and student to mentor and friend over the years since Maya's family had moved to Colorado. Elena's visit represented more than just support for Maya's musical achievement. It was recognition of how Maya had successfully balanced the different elements of her personality and training to become someone who was stronger and more complete than she could have been if she had abandoned either pursuit. The concert hall was already buzzing with activity when Maya arrived for sound check and final rehearsal. The Denver Symphony was renowned for its excellence and professionalism, and performing with them represented a milestone that most conservatory students could only dream of achieving. Maya had earned this opportunity through a combination of exceptional auditions, strong recommendations from her professors, and the kind of compelling personal story that made audiences eager to support emerging artists. Maestro Rodriguez, the symphony's conductor, had worked with Maya extensively during the preparation process and had been consistently impressed by her maturity and musical intelligence. He had conducted hundreds of young soloists over his career, but there was something special about Maya's approach to music making that reminded him why he had fallen in love with conducting in the first place. She brought a depth of emotional understanding to her performances that couldn't be taught, only lived and earned through experience. During the final rehearsal, Maya felt the familiar sensation of the orchestra surrounding her with sound, the individual instruments blending into a sonic landscape that seemed to lift her violin's voice and carry it to places it couldn't reach alone. This was what she had missed most during her months of isolation at Westfield High, the sense of belonging to something larger than herself, of contributing her unique voice to a collective effort that created beauty none of them could achieve individually. The rehearsal went smoothly, with Maya navigating the technical challenges of the Paganini with the kind of effortless precision that made difficult music sound simple. But beyond the technical execution, there was an emotional depth to her interpretation that brought tears to the eyes of several orchestra members who had heard the piece performed dozens of times, but never quite like this. As evening approached, and audience members began filing into the concert hall, Maya took a few minutes to center herself in the green room behind the stage. She had developed this pre-performance ritual during her high school years, a combination of breathing exercises learned from Elena and mental visualization techniques that helped her connect with the emotional core of whatever piece she was about to perform. Tonight's performance felt particularly significant because it represented the completion of a circle that had begun 2 years earlier in a devastated music room. Maya was no longer the girl who had been broken by cruelty and rebuilt herself through music. She was an artist who had learned to transform every experience, both painful and joyful, into something beautiful that could touch the hearts of others who might be struggling with their own challenges. Maya's parents had driven down from their home outside Denver, their pride evident in every conversation they'd had leading up to tonight's performance. They had watched their daughter navigate the transition from victim to victor with a combination of amazement and concern, sometimes wondering if she was pushing herself too hard in her determination to succeed. But they had also seen how music had become not just Maya's career path, but her method of processing and sharing the full spectrum of human experience. Mrs. Chen had brought Maya's grandmother's photograph to display in her dressing room, a tradition that had started during Maya's first youth orchestra performance and continued through every significant concert since then. The photograph served as both inspiration and reminder of the musical heritage that connected Maya to generations of women who had used art to survive and thrive despite overwhelming challenges. Mr. Chen had invited several colleagues from his engineering firm to attend the performance, eager to share his daughter's achievement with people who had supported their family during the difficult transition to Colorado. These were the same people who had offered practical help and emotional support when Maya was struggling with bullying and social isolation, and seeing her success felt like a victory for the entire community that had rallied around the Chen family. As the audience settled into their seats and the house lights began to dim, Maya made her way to the wings of the stage where she could see the orchestra taking their positions. The familiar sight of musicians tuning their instruments and preparing for performance filled her with excitement rather than nervousness. She had learned that the energy she once interpreted as anxiety was actually anticipation, her body and mind preparing to share something meaningful with people who had chosen to spend their evening listening to live music. Sarah Thompson was among the audience members, having driven down from Fort Collins where she was completing her senior year as a kinesiology major. Sarah had remained one of Maya's closest friends from high school, and their relationship had deepened as they both matured and gained perspective on the experiences that had brought them together. Sarah understood better than most how far Maya had traveled from the shy girl who had eaten lunch alone in the music room. Sarah had also become something of an advocate for arts education in her own right, using her platform as a successful student athlete to speak about the importance of supporting diverse talents and interests among young people. Her friendship with Maya had taught her that excellence came in many forms, and that the qualities that made someone a great athlete, discipline, focus, resilience, teamwork, were the same qualities that made someone a great artist or scholar or leader. Even more surprising, Chloe Martinez had made the drive from her college in Boulder to attend Maya's performance. Chloe's journey from bully enabler to genuine ally had been difficult and sometimes painful, requiring her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself and her past behavior. But her relationship with Maya had ultimately become one of the most meaningful aspects of her college experience, teaching her about the power of genuine remorse and consistent action to repair damaged relationships. Chloe's presence at the concert represented something profound about the possibility of redemption and growth, even from the darkest moments of human behavior. She had never asked Maya for forgiveness, understanding that forgiveness was something that had to be earned through actions rather than requested through words. Instead, she had spent 2 years demonstrating through her choices and commitments that she had learned from her mistakes and was determined to use her experience to prevent others from making similar choices. As Maestro Rodriguez walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause, Maya felt the familiar surge of energy that preceded her best performances. She was no longer performing to prove anything to anyone or to overcome the memory of past humiliation. She was performing because she had something beautiful to share, because she had learned to transform pain into art, and because she understood that music had the power to connect people across all the barriers that usually kept them separate. The orchestra's opening piece, Mozart's Symphony No. 40, served as both warm-up for the musicians and preparation for the audience. Maya listened from the wings as the familiar melodies filled the concert hall, noting the way the orchestra members seemed to breathe together, creating music that was both precise and spontaneous, disciplined and free. When Maestro Rodriguez introduced Maya to the audience, describing her as a young artist whose remarkable talent is matched only by her extraordinary resilience and grace, the applause was warm and welcoming. Maya walked onto the stage carrying her violin with the same composed dignity she had brought to that first performance at Westfield High. But now that composure came from confidence rather than self-protection. As Maya raised her violin and prepared to begin the Paganini Caprice, she thought briefly about Jessica Winters, who had transferred to a private school after the violin incident and whose current whereabouts Maya neither knew nor needed to know. Jessica's cruelty had been the catalyst for Maya's transformation, but it was no longer the defining factor in Maya's story. Maya had learned that the most powerful response to those who tried to diminish you was simply to become so fully yourself that their opinions became irrelevant. The opening notes of the Caprice rang out across the concert hall with crystalline clarity, immediately capturing the audience's attention and establishing Maya as a performer of exceptional caliber. But as the piece progressed, it became clear that this was more than just a technically proficient performance. Maya was using Paganini's framework to tell her own story, weaving together themes of loss and recovery, challenge and triumph, isolation and connection that spoke to universal human experiences while remaining deeply personal. The audience was completely captivated, drawn into a musical narrative that felt both intimate and universal. Maya's interpretation brought new depth to a piece that many had heard performed numerous times, revealing layers of meaning that could only be accessed by someone who had lived through genuine struggle and emerged with both strength and compassion intact. As Maya moved through the piece's most challenging passages, her technique was flawless but never showy, always serving the musical expression rather than calling attention to itself. This was artistry of the highest order, the kind of performance that reminded everyone present why live music remained irreplaceable despite all the technological alternatives available in the modern world. When the final notes faded into silence, the concert hall erupted in sustained applause that seemed to go on forever. Maya acknowledged the ovation with gracious bows, but her attention was focused on the music itself and the connection she had felt with both the orchestra and the audience during the performance. This was why she had chosen music as her life's work, not for the applause or recognition, but for these moments of transcendent communication, that could only happen when artist and audience opened their hearts to each other completely. Chen had learned that some people become stronger, not in spite of being broken, but because of how they choose to heal. She had discovered that true power came not from the ability to fight back against cruelty, but from the choice to transform that cruelty into something beautiful that could inspire and heal others. Most importantly, she had proven to herself and the world that when you find your authentic voice and have the courage to use it, no one can ever silence you again. The standing ovation continued for nearly 5 minutes, a testament not just to Maya's technical skill, but to the emotional journey she had taken the audience on through her performance. As she finally left the stage, violin case in hand, Maya knew that she had fully stepped into her identity as an artist who could use her gifts to create beauty, foster connection, and remind people of their capacity for both resilience and compassion. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.